Hello. This video is meant for educational purposes for new refrigeration technicians, uh, specifically those working in industrial engine rooms who have little to no experience with HVAC or refrigeration properties. My name is Wes Miller. I am a certified industrial refrigerant operator, CRO from the RITA organization. I am also a licensed stationary engineer in the state of Ohio. And once again, the point of this video is to provide a basic understanding of refrigeration properties and engine room cyclical flow for anyone uninitiated into refrigeration. This is going to be a one take video. There is not going to be a lot of editing. You're going to be seeing my face and you're going to be seeing MS Paint. We're going to be using broad strokes here. This is simply so someone unfamiliar with refrigeration can know what they're looking at and know what's happening inside of piping and vessels and whatnot. You're going to hear me cough. You're going to hear me snort. You're going to see me touch my face, wipe my nose, and you're going to hear me take drags off this because, once again, this is not a professional. I am also, I should say, I'm not affiliated with DeBra Kemple. They were kind enough to give me a hoodie once upon a time. Yeah, so I'm going to jump straight into it. First of all, I need to. Let's see here. Change scene. Am I on scene 1 or scene 2? I'm on scene 2. Okay. So hopefully now you can see my MS Paint screen. So we're going to be talking, before we get to the refrigeration cycle, I should say, there are some eclectic ideas that you're probably not familiar with that you need to understand. These 4 ideas highlighted in red, if you do not understand these, then you are going to have a bad, you are not going to be able to move on to the refrigeration cycle and engine room flow cycle. So I recommend taking the time to rewatch the first part of this video until you fully grasp these ideas, for lack of a better word. So firstly, heat, energy, and temperature. First thing I always try to tell people is that heat, energy, and temperature are very different things. A good way to explain it is heat energy would be similar to, if you're familiar with electricity, heat energy would be similar to watts. Temperature would be similar to amperage. There's no stand-in for voltage. This is not a very good comparison. But heat energy is simply the amount of energy contained in something. It is separate from temperature. Temperature is the intensity of that energy. So if let's say you have 2 cubes of copper. One is 1,000 times the size of the other one. One of the cubes of copper, I don't know what temperature copper melts at, but we're going to say one of the cubes, the smaller cube of copper is at 600 degrees Fahrenheit, and the one that's thousands times its size is at 75 degrees Fahrenheit. That smaller cube at 600 degrees has a much higher temperature, but that larger one, thousands of times its size, thousands of times its mass, probably still has much more heat energy in it. It's just at a lower intensity, lower temperature. It's important to remember this, that what you do with refrigeration is you are moving heat energy. You're not moving temperature. Heat energy and temperature can affect each other, obviously, because when you pull heat energy out of something, you are lowering its temperature. But the temperature is not what you are concerned about. You are concerned about moving heat energy. Mechanical refrigeration is simply taking heat energy out of a chosen medium. Probably in your case, if you're working in an engine room, it's food, poultry, beef, vegetables, whatever you're freezing, you want to take heat energy out of that medium, and then you want to reject that heat energy into an unobjectionable space, which typically is outside. In some very niche applications, you will find other things, but we're not focusing on niche applications. We're focusing on what you're probably dealing with, which you're probably just blowing the heat outside. Pressure, compression, and temperature. So that didn't work, did it? Because I pressed the wrong button. Okay, so pressure, compression, and temperature. Now we're going to leave heat energy aside for a moment because we're talking about about temperature only. That's not true. We're going to talk about heat energy one time at the start of this. Energy flows from high energy density to low energy density, always. Higher pressure water is going to flow against lower pressure water. In a circuit, voltage being supplied into the circuit is going to flow, the electricity is going to flow through the unpowered circuit. And the same is very true with heat. You've probably been told, close the damn window, you're letting all the cold out. Well, that's not true. You're letting heat in. There's no such thing as letting cold anywhere. And there's no such thing as making something cold. You are not adding cold to anything. You've never added cold to anything in your entire life, and you never will. You will simply extract heat from it, which in turn lowers the temperature. It's important to understand that pressure can affect temperature, and compression can affect temperature. That's a misnomer. Pressure cannot affect temperature, but compression can. And what do I mean by that? You do not affect heat energy. I want to make that clear as well. Compression can affect temperature, but not heat energy. If you put gas that is 30 degrees into a compression chamber, like a compressor in an engine room, and you compress it down, you will not do anything to the heat energy inside of it. You will not create or destroy energy, ever. However, you will raise its temperature. And this is why temperature is still useful to us, even though heat energy and temperature are very different things, and we're mostly concerned about heat energy. Temperature is still very useful because energy flows from high energy density to low energy density. So if you have heat energy trapped in refrigerant, you need a way to warm that refrigerant up, or not warm that refrigerant up, to increase that refrigerant's temperature. I have to be careful with my verbiage. You need a way to increase that refrigerant's temperature to get that heat energy out of it, because otherwise the only thing you can do is add more heat to it. Next up, hey, it worked that time. Next up is boiling points, temperature, and heat. Earlier when I said pressure, and I'm going to cross that out for us right now. Earlier when I said pressure affects temperature, I was kind of lying to you. I didn't mean it. It was a stumble. Like I said, we're doing this in one take. Pressure, however, absolutely affects temperature and boiling points. If you take a liquid that you cannot compress and you put it under pressure, you will raise its boiling point higher. For instance, take water. Water at sea level will always boil at 212 degrees. If you go really high up on a mountain, you might get water to boil around 206. If you go underground, you might get water to boil at about 215. But for your entire life, you're probably are always going to see water boil at 212 Fahrenheit. So what's happening at 212 Fahrenheit? This is now where we finally get to talk about interesting things. You have a pot of water. Your pot of water sitting on a burner. I'll throw a little blue down there too. Pot of water's sitting on a burner. Now your water that's inside is going to start boiling. Once it reaches 212 degrees, the water can no longer maintain its shape. The molecules, the actual atoms of the water, they can no longer maintain the shape of a liquid, and they start to fly apart and turn into steam. Now, if you were to put this under pressure by putting a lid on it, and most lids that go on a stove have a little hole cut in them. There we go. If I was an artist, I wouldn't be doing this. So, if you start to increase that pressure, you will notice something. With the increase in pressure comes an increase in temperature. And this is where you would need to reference a PT chart or simply Google temperature of X psi water, or it would be the point of the heat of vaporization of X psi water. Now, and the opposite is true as well. If you were to suck a vacuum on this pot, that water would boil much cooler. And you can get it down to the point where you have water vapor at room temperature. Now, once again, you'd have to be sucking a pretty hard vacuum to get that, but it's possible. I want to make sure that I haven't skipped over anything important. Oddities of phase changing. I want to go over some things during the oddities of phase changing that's related to this, but I'm not going to cover it right now. Making sure I haven't forgotten anything. Like I said, it's a one-take video. I'm not doing this twice, so I'm not editing this. I think we're good. I think we're going to step on to oddities of phase changing, because this is where lots of things might really come together for you, and why are you teaching me these random points? I think oddities of phase changing are really going to bring it together. So, you know what? I'm going to give myself a few dashes. Oh, hell. Shit. I'm going to give myself a few dashes here, so I don't accidentally Control Z my way through my points here. Oddities of phase changing. I told you that water boils at 212. And you might ask me, well, what if I've got the water all the way up to like 230? Well, you don't. There's no such thing as 230 degree water. At least not at 0 psi. Whenever anything changes from a solid to a liquid to a gas, this is called a phase change. And there's some interesting characteristics of phase changes. I know we've blown through these real quick, but this is where we're going to slow down for a minute and talk for a little bit about phase changing, because this is the most important part of refrigeration. It's what you absolutely have to understand to pull everything together. So, water boils at 212, because once you start boiling, any heat energy you add to a substance will not increase its temperature. It will only go towards the changing of phase of that medium. So, if you put a pot of water on a burner, you are adding heat energy, increasing its temperature from, 60 degrees, whatever it is coming out of your pipes, all the way up to 212. where every single bit of heat added to that water will only go into boiling it. If you add more heat, it will boil faster. You will never measure that water at anything other than 212 degrees. Because once it's above 212 degrees, it's not water anymore, it's steam. There's no such thing as 213 degree water. And the same is true for ice. Water will begin to freeze at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Every single bit of water, or every single bit of heat you take out of that water, will not make it any colder. It will simply go towards the phase change that is occurring. You can make it change phases faster, but you can never have 31 degree water. Until you involve pressure. The second you involve pressure, all of this changes. And this is very useful to us in refrigeration. If you need... I should cover one thing first. It takes massive quantities more of heat to phase change something than it does to increase its temperature. Every substance has a specific heat. We're not going to go too deep into specific heat right now, but specific heat is how much heat energy is required to raise its temperature. It's all based off of water. Water is one. It takes 1 BTU, which is a measurement of heat energy, to raise 1 pound of water 1 degree Fahrenheit. You don't need to know this right now. Like I said, we're not going to go deep into specific heat. It's something that you will learn with time. You'll have to learn it with time, but it's just not what we're going to talk about today. Lost track. Pressure. Pressure changes the boiling and freezing points of substances. We just talked about that a moment ago. I'm going to make numbers up because I want to demonstrate the principle to you as opposed to the actual math. We're not worried about the actual math now. You might be very concerned with the actual math at some point in your career. You might have a job where you need to worry about that math every day. You might have to do load calculations, things of that nature. But you're probably, if you're watching this video, you're probably not doing any of that. So we're not going to worry about the math right now. So enjoy some made up numbers and just try to stay along with the general message, the principle I'm trying to demonstrate. If you want to freeze a room to 30 degrees, I should say cool a room to 30 degrees. It's only barely frozen at that point. If you want to cool a room down to 30 degrees, you're going to need a refrigerant that's 30 degrees. If you want to do it efficiently, you're going to want a refrigerant that boils at 30 degrees. Remember that it takes much more heat energy to phase change something than it does to increase or decrease its temperature. So that's what we try to do. We try to find a chemical that can phase change from a liquid to a gas at the desired temperature we want and at a pressure that isn't terribly hard to maintain. If the pressure is easy to maintain and the temperature is what we want, then it's a good refrigerant for the job. So if you want to hold a room at 30 degrees, you're going to want to find a refrigerant that will boil at 30 degrees at, I don't know, 35 psi. 35 psi ain't hard to do by any standard. And remember that the temperature of that boiling liquid is not going to change at any point. It's going to stay that constant 35 degrees. Another advantage, other than the efficiency, another advantage is that you get that constant temperature across a cooling coil, which we're going to talk about when we go into the refrigeration cycle, but not yet. Now you have this boiled chemical. It's a gas now, like steam. It's a vapor, but it's still probably only 31 or 2 degrees, because all that heat energy that you sucked out of that room to cool it to 30 degrees went into boiling that chemical. Yeah, maybe the vapor picked up 1 or 2 degrees on its way towards the end of a refrigeration coil, but it's still 31 or 2 degrees. If you remember, heat, energy, and temperature. Heat energy only flows from high density to low density. So if you want to get all that heat energy that's stored in that vapor, it all went into boiling that liquid, not to increasing its temperature. If you want to get that heat energy out of there, you got to get something colder than 32 degrees to put that heat energy into. Or you can compress it, because when you compress a gas, you increase its temperature. You're taking the same, back on me, you are taking the same amount of heat energy, get out of my way, you're taking the same amount of heat energy and you are squeezing it into a smaller volume, I should say. And like I said, heat energy is the temperature is the intensity of heat energy. It's the temperature is the density of heat energy. So if you take this much and you squish it down this big, you have wildly increased. I just realized that I moved my microphone away from my face. I hope that comes through. But if you were taking this much heat energy and squeezing it down, you are increasing the density and the intensity of the heat energy in that space, because you're making the space smaller. So you compress your gas and you raise your temperature. Once again, we're going to pull some random numbers out. You pop it up to 150 psi, and you've made it 180 degrees. Now, heat energy can't wait to get out of that. It's 180 degrees. You can get heat energy out of that into 90 degree air. Energy flows from higher density to lower density, and you've made the density so high that it's happy to go anywhere. And if you're following along, you might start to be able to see where this is going. That you're rejecting heat somewhere unobjectionable, like outside. We're gonna pause for a second. We're gonna go back to this window. And I'm going to tell you not to move on unless you are grasping these key points. Heat energy and temperature are very different, but they affect each other, as in the way that energy moves based on temperature. Compression of gas raises its temperature. Pressure can raise boiling points and sublimation points, as well as lower boiling points and sublimation points. Your temperature will never change while you are phase changing. And phase changing takes a lot more energy to do than simply raising or lowering temperature. And if you think you've got all that, we're going to move on to the refrigeration cycle, which means all of this can be wiped away because you understand it. You will never need to ask about it ever again. Forever. So, we're going to start with cold liquid. You have very cold liquid that is at a specific pressure to be the specific temperature you want it to be. You know what? I should... We're going to do color coded. Your cold liquid is going to go through a coil of piping. Typically, with a swastika looking fan blowing over this coil of piping. And what that's going to be doing is recirculating warm energy from the room through your coil and taking the heat out of that air. In this pipe, you're going to have boiling refrigerant. It's boiling at 30 degrees, 40 degrees, whatever you want it to be boiling at. But it's... Well, I said no edits or stitches, but it had to stand up. So, you have cold boiling liquid in a coil, and you're cooling your warm air in your room to cold air. You now have slightly less cold vapor coming through, or coming out of that coil, and it is going to enter a compressor. Typically, a triangle is a pretty universal symbol for a compressor on your piping and instrumentation diagrams. A compressor is going to compress that slightly less cold refrigerant vapor into hot, high-pressure refrigerant gas, which is then going to go to another coil. If you right-click in MS Paint, it undoes everything you've done so far. And if you, it's going to go through another coil, exactly the same as the first one, where another fan is less swastika-like, but just as misshapen as the first, will blow air, typically atmospheric outside air, over that coil to remove heat from it. Depending on the application, you might sprinkle some water on it as well, if it's an evaporative condenser. The point of this is you remove heat from that coil, and eventually it begins to condense back into liquid as you cross back over its point of sublimation, I believe. Sublimation would be freezing. Or I guess you cross back over its point of vaporization, back under the point of vaporization, and it begins to condense back into a liquid. So by the end of this coil, you are going to have warm liquid refrigerant leaving it. You've taken all that heat, you've bumped the pressure up so that it's high enough temperature that you can get rid of it, and now you've blown all that heat probably outside. But now you have this warm liquid, and you need to make it cold again. It's probably this point that it would be useful for me to do something along the lines of write 30 psi. say 150. PSI. So down here, you're still 150 PSI. You're still on the discharge side of that compressor. I mean, you might find a slightly lower pressure here because pressure goes down the further you get away from the discharge point of a compressor. So, I mean, you might have 130, 140, but still high pressure. And you need to get that liquid cold again. It will simply pass through an expansion device. And I say an expansion device because an expansion device can be one of multiple different things. It can be a valve. It can be a capillary tube system. Essentially, a expansion device will be a restriction in the line where all that high pressure liquid runs into it, and the other side allows it to expand back to, let's say, 30-ish PSI. Now that we're back on the suction side of this compressor. Something will happen that is called flash gas. It is important to understand what flash gas is. It will be more important to you later in your career. But flash gas is essentially when the expansion is allowed. Are you on me right now, or are you? Ah, you've been on my face this entire time. Great. Well, no retakes. That's what I said. How long have you been on my face? That's upsetting. So, you have your cold liquid. You know, this is why I wanted to do one take until I got called away. That's so irritating. There we go. That's easy to see. I'm going to use that bright orange. You have cold liquid refrigerant over here on this side. And it boils into a less cold refrigerant gas. That gas is then compressed by a compressor into a high pressure, high temperature gas that flows through another coil with a fan blowing over it, rejecting heat probably outside. You're left with a condensed, high pressure, warm liquid that goes through an expansion device of some sort, probably a valve, a restriction in the line that allows the pressure to be reduced on the opposite side of it. And then you have cold liquid. And this is where we were, down here. We were getting ready to talk about flash gas. Flash gas is what happens to allow the liquid to become cold. The second this liquid hits the other side of this valve, it goes, whoa, I'm not 150 PSI anymore. I'm 30 PSI. And when it is 30 PSI, it is able to immediately turn whatever little bit of heat energy is left inside of it into gas and give up the heat that is required for that phase change. It's not a lot. It's maybe 10%. So while we are going to say that you have very cold liquid in this part of the line, it's actually going to be about a 90% liquid, 10% gas mixture, but that's going to complicate it for the scope of this video. I've probably already messed you up enough by not swapping my scene over to paint. We're not going to worry about how much flash gas there is. And in an engine room, your flash gas is largely taken care of by your vessels anyway. And we're going to get there in a moment. So we're going to re-go over everything we've talked about. You can control the temperature of something by controlling the pressure. You can control its boiling point by controlling the pressure. So by holding this side of this refrigeration loop at 30 psi, you are making whatever chemical is in here boil at, let's say, 30 degrees. We're going to keep this really simple. You're going to make this side of the refrigeration loop boil at 30 degrees. Now its temperature will not change because all of that heat energy from the warm room, and you know what? I never do this when I do these doodles, but I'm going to section this off. This is in a room. So your temperature of this chemical, whatever's in here, is not going to increase while it's boiling. It's going to be cooling that air and taking all of that heat and putting it towards its phase change. Up here in the yellow, you might have a slightly warmer liquid. Can you see my mouse? Hold on. Okay, yes, you can see my mouse. That's very good. Up here in the yellow, you're going to have slightly warmer gas. I mean, you might be talking 32 to 35 degrees. Still what we would call cold. Refrigerant gas. However, because energy flows from high density to low density, you need a way to get the heat energy out of this gas. You can either find something colder than 35 degrees to move it into, or you can simply compress that gas up to, let's say, 150 degrees. And let's say 150 psi. My apologies. We'll say 180 degrees. These are made up numbers. I don't know what refrigerant this might be. Then, once you're outside, a fan will blow over this coil and reject that heat energy outside. It's not destroying it, it's simply moving it out of the system to somewhere where you don't care about it. Like outside your refrigerated building, or outside of your house, or outside of your refrigerator. Then down here, let's say we've got $80 degree, 150 psi liquid. You have taken all of that excess heat energy out of that gas, and you've condensed it back into a liquid. However, now you need a way to make it cold again, because if you send it back through this coil as is, it will only add heat to your room. It will not remove heat from your room. So you allow that liquid to enter a lower pressure section of the system, which is delineated by an expansion device of some sort, usually a restriction in the line. And you now are back to your 30 degree, 30 psi liquid. And everything can repeat itself over and over again in this loop. It would have been nice for you to be able to see me draw it, but that already didn't happen. So, hopefully, this is making some semblance of sense. Before we go to engine room flow, I highly recommend that you either rewatch this video or do some further reading on your own to fully understand all of these concepts. If you don't understand what we've talked about so far, engine room flow is not going to make any sense to you, as it only builds off of this system that's doodled out right here. It's Not as complicated as you might be worried about, but it is this plus more. So if you do not grasp what's going on here, I advise you to ask questions of friends, Google some things that I said, do some research, or rewatch this video to see if there's something you missed or something that didn't quite make sense to you the first time. That now that you have the complete picture, it does make sense to you. But if you're ready to move on, we're going to talk about engine room flow. And I said no editing and no stitches, but that already got fucked up. So I'm going to take a little bit of a break. And I'm going to come back and we will talk about flow through an engine room. Okay, so, I said no stitches, no edits, mostly because I'm lazy and I didn't want to stitch this video together in Ace Movie Maker, which now I'm going to have a watermark right around here, I think. It's going to be ugly. I also wanted to avoid problems like or mistakes like the not having paint up the whole time I drew that system, because you missed out on a lot, and you also missed my great swastika fan joke. I tried to draw a fan and look what I did. Once again, if I was an artist, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd be selling art to millionaires for them to write off on their taxes, or donating it to a museum that their friends own. So now, though, we are going to move on and we're going to talk about engine rooms. Hopefully at this point you understand that you have an evaporative coil with cold liquid in it. This liquid is boiling at a temperature that you're controlling. The temperature is not rising because all that heat energy is going into boiling the liquid. That gas that you've boiled the liquid into is getting compressed to raise its temperature so that you now have a way to reject that heat. And then once all of that hot gas has coalesced back into a liquid, you are allowing the pressure to drop. You are allowing flash gas to occur, which flash gas is just a industry term for very fast boiling, because that 80-degree liquid does not want to be a liquid at 80 degrees once you've let it down to 30 psi. It's perfectly happy being a liquid at 150 psi, but now you've let it down to 30 psi. And now it doesn't want to be a liquid anymore, so a bit of it's going to flash off into a gas. But once it reaches the temperature that it wants to be at that pressure, it's going to stop flashing and remain a very cold liquid. A liquid gets sent back to the evaporator, sucks heat out of the room. Gas, compressed. A compressed gas rejects heat, condenses into a liquid. Pressure is dropped. Doesn't want to be an 80-degree liquid anymore. Flashes a bit of gas off until it's happy being a liquid at its new temperature. Back through the evaporator. Constant cycle, repeating itself again and again and again. And over the course of time, lowering the temperature to that room. Now we can talk about what is probably happening in your engine room. It is worth noting that all engine rooms are going to be vastly different. Some systems are going to be recirculated systems. Some systems are going to be direct feed systems. Direct feed is an older way of building refrigeration engine rooms. It's not used that much anymore. I wouldn't expect a system built in the last 15 or 20 years to be direct feed. It might be if they cheaped out on it. Direct feed's not the worst thing in the world. It's definitely harder to work with than recirculated. Excuse me. And we're going to just talk about a two-stage system. Your system might have more than 2 stages, but this will give you an understanding of what's happening in an engine room, so that when you walk into work tomorrow, you can look at the pipes in your engine room and go, oh, I understand now. And you can follow any piping that we might not cover and kind of figure out what's going on. Because now you have the basis. You have your root formed to build off of. So this time I'm going to double check that we switch over to paint. We have. Before I start going into it, the last thing I'm going to talk about is we're going to take up this entire screen. It's going to get messy, but if you can focus for the next 7 to 15 minutes and follow along, even though it ends up messy, we can hopefully you'll have an idea of what's going on. We are going to start on the high side of this 2-stage engine room. That is way too big, Wesley. Okay. So you are going to have a high side vessel. This high side vessel is going to have 2 pumps at the bottom of it. You know what? In the interest of avoiding making PP shapes, we're going to say that your engine room was built by an insane person who did not add a single backup. There's 1 pump, and if it fails, you're dead. This high side vessel is going to have high side liquid in it. And once again, we are going to make up random temperatures and pressures. I'm going to try and keep them realistic. We're going to say this vessel is held at 30 psi, and the liquid inside of it is 25 degrees Fahrenheit. This is pretty standard for ammonia refrigeration. However, if your refrigerant is not ammonia in your engine room, you're not going to have pressures and temperatures anything close to these. So this pump is going to be, pumping liquid out into your plant. You know what? Maybe I can get away with using the straight line tool. Make this less hideous. Oh, damn you. Pumping it out into your plant to an evaporator that you probably want to hold around, I don't know, anywhere from, hell, 25 to maybe 50 degrees. Because if once it gets 50 degrees, you can turn the liquid feed off to it. It doesn't have to always ram it straight down to 25 degrees Fahrenheit. And then gas is going to be returning from that evaporator and very specifically going in to the top of your vessel. Why do I say into the top of your vessel? Well, it is so that any leftover liquid will dribble down back into the sump, for lack of a better word, of this vessel. And the rest of the gas can then be pulled off the top of the vessel And we're actually up here. Oh, hell. We are going to make the compressor zone. Line tool. This is going to go up. You know what? I could make this a lot cleaner and less hideous. No, I messed up the compressor zone. There we go. I can make this a lot cleaner if I do it like this. I'm going to be quiet for points of this, but everything will be explained eventually. Just have faith. I don't have a way to make a sideways triangle, so our compressors are going to be bricks. High side compressor. This high side compressor is going to be taking that high side gas. I wonder if I should label those liquid gas. I don't know if that's entirely necessary, but I will. That looked awful. It is going to be turning it into compressed hot gas. Where it will go. You know, it would be much less frustrating for me to have this ready and then just explain it to you, but watching it be traced out in real time, I feel adds something to it. I really do. I've explained engine rooms to a lot of people using this method, and it seems to work better doing it like this. So up on the rooftop, here is your condenser. Man, there's no real fan shape. Be nice if there's a fan shape, because I've already proven I can't draw a fan. We'll have to deal with another one of these. Oh yeah, that's hideous. Yeah, there we go. No one would know that's a fan if you didn't hear me say it. And you're going to have your liquid coming out of... Where's my line tool? Your liquid coming out of here. I should make this orange. It's going to be orange in most engine rooms anyway. this orange is going to connect to something called your high pressure receiver. And I will explain this bisection here in a moment. I promise we're going to get there, but it's not important right now. But we are going to talk about it. It's an important part of the way engine rooms work. I promise. You can trust me. So, whoops. When this top mystery part of your, you know what, we didn't do our labeling. Okay, so this HPR is going to be at the same pressure as your discharge of your high side compressor. And this liquid's going to fill at the top, and when it gets too high, it's going to overflow into the bottom. There's a reason this top part is held separate. We are going to talk about it, but we're going to talk about it at the end. For now, it is important to know that this high pressure liquid is going to go through an expansion device. What symbol can I use for an expansion device? We're going to use a diamond. And it is going to fill your high side vessel. Let me fill out our arrows here while I talk about this. So, damn, paint's not easy to use. Yeah, I know most people have it mastered right around the age of 13, but I've always been lagging in the artistic department. So, this liquid is being allowed to expand into this vessel to give you your 30 psi high side. And you might notice that this is just a very elaborate and overdone version of what we put over here in the past. You also probably don't have one compressor in your engine room. You probably have two. You might even have 8. Depends on how large that engine room is. But this is generally going to be what you're looking at for your high side. You have your cold liquid going out there, boiling off and becoming a cold gas, and that cold gas getting compressed so that you can reject heat out of it outside. Here's where things get funky. You probably have another vessel in that engine room, because you are probably blast freezing food. Now, if you're just maintaining a warehouse at your location, this might be all you have. If you're just maintaining a big ass warehouse with one temperature on it, this might be all you're looking at. Let me clean up my little splotches and blotches here. But if you are blast freezing food that's being produced in your facility, you are absolutely going to have at least one more stage. You might even have a stage below this, but we are only going to talk about this one. Mostly because it's simpler to learn this way, and also because I'm doing this for free. So, we're going to put up here 12-inch vacuum. Negative 45 degrees Fahrenheit. At some point in your career, you will have to learn what a vacuum and PSI absolute versus PSI gauge means. I might go into that at the end of this video, but for now, all you need to know is that the pressure in this chamber is lower than the pressure that you are sitting in right now watching this video. Lower than atmospheric pressure. There isn't negative pressure in here. There's absolutely pressure in this vessel, but it's lower than what's out here. Because every PSI gauge you've ever seen in your life has lied to you. But once again, we're going to go into that later, if we even go into it at all. Might leave you something to Google. I don't know how tired I'll be at the end of this. So, once again, your pump, only one to avoid phallic shapes and also to simplify things, is going to be pumping this extremely cold liquid out into your facility. And you know what? I'm going to actually undo that because it's space constraints. You're going to have to follow piping more complicated than this in your engine room. If you can't do this, then I have bad news for you. Come down over here, come down over here. Yeah, I'll pop below that real quick. Over here. And where are my arrows? Arrow. Wow, I'm getting sloppy. Sideways arrow. Bring it around the other way. Okay. Same thing's happening. Your liquid is being pumped out to an evaporator. Oh, I forgot the damn... Your liquid is being pumped out to an evaporator. It's boiling out there and it's coming back as gas. Any surviving liquid in the vapor is going to dribble back into your bottom of your vessel to be reused, and gas will be pulled straight across. And we're about to get into something a little more interesting than what happened last time. So, your low side gas is going into your low side compressors, sometimes called boosters, especially by older guys who've been doing this a long time. I much prefer low side compressor myself, but you might hear them use either or. These compressors will be bumping this up to the same temperature that we ran into over here on the high side. But the thing is, they can't take it from this low of a pressure in a vacuum all the way up to 150 psi. And they also can't get rid of all of the heat that this has absorbed in one step. It's too cold, and you start to run into issues with compression ratio. It is theoretically possible for you to do this all in one stage, but not realistically. It would be obscenely cost inefficient to have a compression ratio of like 38 or whatever you would need to compress this enough to get all the heat energy out of it. And there also even comes a point where it's not possible. I mean, materials have limitations. Steel is only steel, even titanium's only titanium. Sometimes you just can't do it. Or if you can, it's not, like I said, it's not feasible. So, this is going to come into your this booster discharge, or low side compressor discharge, is going to come in to your high side vessel, where it will go around. And I've actually seen both, but I'm only talking about this because it is the much more common way to do it. I have actually seen a high side vessel where this line just ends down here without being a coil, and it just blows hot compressor discharge gas directly into the high side refrigerant, which I find insane. But it is going to go through this high side refrigerant, this 25-degree refrigerant, which is going to cool it. It's also going to cause some of this refrigerant to boil. This vessel's pulling double duty. It's sending refrigerant out to be boiled out here, and it's also letting its own refrigerant get boiled in itself because it's helping to cool down the low side. This line of booster discharge is going to end, and it's gas that's now been... I thought there was like a spray paint. Oh, there is. This gas that's now been cooled down a little bit is going to linger with this high side gas. And they are going to get sucked out by the high side compressors, recompressed, sent to the rooftop to condense. And I'm realizing now that I left out something that you might have assumed should be there, but there's no reason you should have to assume it. I am teaching you. God damn it. Some bastard. I wish I wasn't so damn stupid. I mean, how many times have I tried to draw this one line, right? It was embarrassing at this point. So... there we go. Expansion device. Jesus Christ. Expansion device from the high stage liquid to the low stage liquid. When this needs liquid, it will call for liquid from the high stage. So your liquid is just stepping down in stages in pressure and temperature in your gas is stepping up in stages. So what's this? Well, it's nothing that important. You'll probably never fuck with it throughout your entire time at whatever job you're at. Because it works off of physics. It doesn't have any moving parts really. I think they're dumb pieces of shit, but this is called a thermosiphon. It is how almost every compressor is cooled. In my opinion, there's better ways to do compressor cooling, but that's all it is oil cooling for your compressors. It's gonna come up here. And it's going to provide cooling for your compressor's oil. You might say, well, I thought that was like 90 degrees in there. Yeah, well, your compressor's oil is like 200 degrees. So it's cooling it. And I hate showing this on a diagram because it just adds more clutter to the piping, and it's useless to know this. There's almost no reason you'll ever touch a thermosiphon because it either works or it doesn't work. However, it would not be a complete image if I didn't show you that this is what a thermosiphon is. This is what that bisection is doing. And there will be a thermosiphon return coming back. I'm not going to draw that. I think you get it. Usually there's something along the lines of like a check valve coming off the top of this. So that like when pressure builds up, they can join this gas going to get condensed. But once again, you're never going to mess with this thing. You're never going to even make an adjustment to it, because if you make adjustments to them, they stop working. They work off physics, no moving parts. So there we have it. Generally, the flow of an engine room. I remember talking about something down here that I said we'd go back over, but I've forgotten what that was now. You shouldn't be left with too many questions at this point. Oh, that's probably not true. But at least now you have an idea of what you're looking at, what's happening behind the scenes. Something that's worth mentioning is if you go out here towards the evaporators, you're going to find other expansion valves, and you might wonder why there are expansion valves all the way out in the plant when all your expansion's taking place here in the engine room. Your liquid's going to gain a bit of heat as it goes out into the building, and those expansion valves are a way of taking that liquid back down to whatever temperature it's actually supposed to be. If you leave the United States, in other countries, you will find those extra expansion valves. They are called reset valves, which I feel like that makes a lot more sense. You're resetting the temperature back to what it should be for that application. But we are here in the country where half the population loves bluegrass and the other half loves mumble rap. So, what do you got? What are you gonna expect? This is it, really. I wish I'm gonna sit here and ramble for a little bit because I really want to remember what I wanted to talk about here. Damn. damn if there wasn't something I wanted to talk about down there, and I told you we might not talk about it, but then I said we might, and I intended to. It's just gone now. That sucks. Getting older is rough, man. The dementia's already kicking in. Well, with that, I'm going to call this a day. Man, that's gonna bug me. I might go back and watch this video real quick and come back and talk about whatever that was. I feel like it... Was it compression ratio? Was compression ratio what I was wanting to talk about? And I did mention compression ratio? I don't know. I'm going to rewatch this video. And we're going to... If it was something worthwhile, then I'll be back with a stitch. If not, hopefully this is enlightened you somewhat about your new career path. You won't find a diagram like this anywhere. You might find your piping and instrumentation diagram in your engine room, but it's probably going to be a little much for you to look through. If this video is helpful to you, your piping and instrumentation diagram is hands down going to be too much for you to look through. Something simpler like this might help you get a grasp on what you're looking at. But I hope this helped in some way. I'm going to go rewatch this video and see what it is I forgot to talk about. If it was something worth mentioning, I will be back in a stitch. If not, good luck. Vacuum and pressure per square inch absolute, PSI-A, as opposed to pressure per square inch gauge, PSI-G. Every gauge you've ever looked at your entire life is probably read out to you in PSI-G. There's a separate measurement called PSI-A that takes into account that you are sitting under pressure right now. What you would call zero PSI actually is pressure. It's about, I think it's 14.7. So you're under 14.7 PSI right now, but if you look at a gauge, it's going to read 0. A gauge that reads in PSI absolute will actually start at 14.7. So when we go into, I do. So when we go into talking about a vacuum, there's not negative pressure in here. There's like 6 PSI absolute. You know, there's not negative pressure or 0 pressure. It's a vacuum in the sense that it is lower pressure than what you are experiencing right now. If you poked a hole in that pipe, it would suck in because the pressure out here is higher than the pressure inside, but there is still pressure inside. It's just below what every gauge has probably ever told you is 0. But every gauge was lying. PSI absolute is valuable when you talk about compression ratios. If this video is helping you, then compression ratios is probably a little bit beyond what you're needing to know right now. This is a bare bones basic intro to the refrigeration cycle and engine room flow. I'm going to keep it concise to those topics. Yes, I'm glad I came back because that throws a lot of new technicians off. It's not negative pressure. It's just lower than what you're sitting in right now.